Are you there?
All right, we are, I believe, on the internet. This is our usual Friday morning question and answer, but we're playing around with the format a little bit today. Those of you who've been following the channel know that I've been playing around with Thief in the Night live streams, and part of that has been, let's see, here we go. Part of that has been trying to find other ways of discussion. So when I first started doing questions and answers, hi, this is Paul, that's right. When I first started doing questions and answers, I did it in the Discord because I didn't want to do sort of the Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Peugeot thing where I have this enormous list of questions and I just sort of ramble on about them, which is exactly what I've done for the last 6 months or so. And I did it in the Discord space, sort of, again, as an estuary. We're not just out on the internet taking anything that comes in from the open sea. It's buffered by the culture and structure and community of the Discord arena. And what I had hoped for was a little bit more pushback discussions on the questions that I work through. What wound up happening is that most people stayed in the PVK Q&A recorded voice room and didn't actually get involved in the conversation. Now, there are a lot of good reasons for that. Part of the reason you try things with experimentation is you learn things that you thought you would know before, but you really don't. Our imaginations sort of reach into the future, but we are too small. We can't know enough. And so there are always things that happen that we can't anticipate. Sometimes they're good things. Sometimes they're bad things. So what we learned by doing the question and answer in the format that we've used for the last 6 months or so is that, 30, 40, 50 people will congregate in the room, and most of them will stay muted and silent the whole time, which is normal because you can't actually have a conversation with 30, 40, or 50 people. The downside of that is that a few brave, intrepid souls would in fact come in and offer a little bit of feedback and some rebuttal. That was more of the goal of doing it in the Discord rather than just taking a list of questions from Patreon or Substar or internet forums or whatever, and just having the expert or the celebrity or the talking head pontificate, which, there's a certain appetite for pontification. But part of the reason I've been playing around with the Thief in the Night live streams is to mine, that sounds terrible because it makes you so impersonal, but to mine the wisdom in all of you, because I know full well that the wisdom in the community is greater than the wisdom in the individual, and individuals harvest wisdom from the community, and it actually takes something like an estuary to be able to sift and filter both the power of the fresh water coming in from the mountains, but also the nutrients that are in the sea. And what happens in an estuary is that the nutrients and the fertility of the soil congregates in one place, and that's what makes it such a dynamic bioenvironment. So again, the question and answer format is fine. Peugeot uses it. Peterson used to use it. Many people use it. There are plenty of videos out there of me talking off the top of my head, and that's cool. But for me, the real advantage is to listen to you. So we might not get through as many questions. There might be some opinions that some of you don't like. That's all part of the process. And so I've expanded the impromptu live stream room to be a little bit bigger so more people can be in it. And this is what I'm asking. If you're in it, and you want to talk or address something, turn on your camera so I know that you want to address something. And if you're just going to lurk, you can just follow the live stream on YouTube and you can hear all the content, and that's fine. And one of the things that I've learned is that a good number of people come into the PVK recorded voice room for the question and answer to just listen, which is absolutely fine because they're listening at work. And then often there's sort of an after party in that room where some people leave because the show is over, but others stay. And usually the conversation goes, depending on what time zone you're in, either well into the day, or if you're in the UK, well into the night. It's raining in Sacramento, and my attempts at avoiding a homeless encampment out my office door have failed miserably, and someone is smoking a cigarette right outside my office door. I swear anybody who would visit my office would walk into this room and say, the pastor has a smoking problem. No, it's the people that are sitting outside my door have a smoking problem, and the weather stripping on my door is insufficient. So that impacts none of you because none of you can smell what I smell, but I'm sure breathing it in. Anyway, so Rick continues to have his day job. He is in the YouTube comment section moderating that. And I'm sure he'll bop in and out of the Discord server too if there's a problem in there. But this is how we're going to try it this week. And it might be a disaster. It might be a success. It will probably be somewhere in the middle. We might try this for a week or two. Maybe it'll be a disaster and we'll abandon it. But I look forward to the feedback from many of you. And I see I recommended that if someone in the Discord server just basically share the live stream in that PVK recorded room, then those who gather there can listen. Also, in the Friday live streams section in the Discord server, there is there's the real-time text chat, which you can come in, Sam. Part of the fun of the Discord server, again, as an estuary, is that you find a community and you find wisdom among the people in the community that is more bite-sized for you. It's better than I can give you. And that, again, is why the wisdom of a community always is more than the wisdom of an individual. And I see that I'm going to have to do a lot of learning myself in this. Well, that's interesting. Let's see. This is... let's just lower that one. There we go. And I'll move my camera. And yeah, this is going to be rough and messy, but here we go. And I'm going to pull up the questions that have been accumulating. I haven't done question and answer for a few weeks. So here we go. My father just died. I arrived about an hour after he passed and held his still warm hand before the funeral took him away. Will you help me pray for him? I've prayed for him. I hope you will too. Thank you. My name is Bradley. Let's pray, Bradley. Lord, you know all things. And you know Bradley and his father and his family. You know both of their stories and their intersecting stories better than each of them or both of them can. And Lord, I know almost nothing about the situation, but you do. And what's important is not what I know, it's what you know. So Lord, I pray for the situation entire, that you would be with those who are mourning, those who are grieving, those who are frightened. And I pray, Lord, that you will watch over them all and give them your peace. This I ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. So, Kodai, I'm sorry to hear about your father. I see that that was in the middle of December. I hope, despite COVID, you've had an opportunity to do some grieving. And, I pray that God blesses you. Okay. Yes and no's. Matthew. What are the similarities and differences between Reformation and deconstruction? Reformation with a small r. So I did a conversation with Roger, and that will probably be coming to the channel Friday or Saturday or Monday. Conversations that I have that aren't particularly time sensitive, I usually hold for a gap in my stock to just kind of keep the channel as level as possible. I know I've been putting out a lot of content lately. Content might accelerate. I've got some more ideas. And again, YouTube and Discord are places for me to play around with things. So one of the things that I talked to Roger about, and he commented, he said that he commented on Twitter, said upcoming conversation. He thought, oh, another one? No. I've been reading C.S. Lewis's Pilgrim's Regress, and I'm sure Jeff, who was in the impromptu live stream room, would be quite excited about that. I read Pilgrim's Recess years and years ago and remembered very little from it. And now looking back at who I was when I read it and understanding who I am now, I've got a much better grasp on the book than I had. So I'm loving Pilgrim's Regress right now. And one of Roger's comments to me was, isn't Pilgrim's Regress basically a story of deconstruction and reconstruction? And I think that's right. Another thing that I picked up this morning on Twitter, if you really want to live stream into stuff I'm reading and doing, you can follow my paulvanderklay.me or leadingchurch.com. Great little quote from Henry Wallace on Twitter. Deconstruction is the transformation of ideology into faith. And I think he's playing with Jordan Peterson's idea of ideology as crippled religion. So in Pilgrim's Recess, I've been thinking about, how could I bring my enjoyment of Pilgrim's Regress Pilgrim's Regress onto my channel. It might help if I get the title right. The book starts in Puritania, and I love his treatment of the landlord and the steward's mask and the little boy and the board of rules. And I think there are a lot of similarities potentially between deconstruction and Reformation. I think the difference between them will be the telos, or the end point, or the destination. Tim Keller has said quite a bit that let me phrase it in another way. In modernity, people like to imagine that when they leave Puritania, that might be evangelicalism, it's basically the religion of their childhood. When they leave Puritania, they are escaping a tyranny or an oppression or something of that nature. Tim Keller has for a long time asserted that the best metaphor is, and I'm adding words to, elaborating what I believe he was saying. A better metaphor is not so much, let's say, leaving the cave into the light, as, let's say, Plato's fable of the cave, allegory of the cave. I think it's much more a matter of changing rooms. Because what you're really doing is swapping different ideologies and different religious systems and probably changing around some presuppositions. Now, you don't have direct agency over your presuppositions by definition, but your presuppositions are definitely formed in you. Jonathan Haidt talks about this with his elephant and the rider and the path. In many ways, the path are the presuppositions. And if you want to remake the elephant, change the elephant's herd. So the difference between deconstruction and Reformation is really destination. Are you getting, now I'll bring in some of my bounded set, centered set talk. Are you moving towards the truth, or are you moving away from the truth? So I am not a relativist, and I am not post-truth, but I am in fact a Calvinist who believes that all of us have problems with the truth. And when I say problems with the truth, I mean both problems knowing the truth and problems agreeing with the truth. I think that's what total depravity means. It doesn't mean that we are as depraved as we could be in terms of vertical. It means that horizontally, we are horizontally depraved, meaning that all of our life is touched by both limitation, but also willful rebellion. So I like that question, and I think we should continue to work on this deconstruction theme because, as I've said before, I don't think it's a wholly bad thing for people to necessarily leave Puritania. The child's view of the steward, and perhaps even that child's father and mother and uncle. There's a delightful scene of a funeral in Puritania. Lewis captures what Andy Kivenhoven used to say about there's much lying at funerals. Captures a lot of that. Yet, now I haven't gotten to the end of the book yet, but I assume that when John returns to Puritania, or at least if he doesn't do so in the context of the road and the dream, but does so in terms of his mental remembering, Puritania will look differently depending on whether the person stays in deconstructive mode or arrives at Reformation. Lewis also said, the point of seeing through something is not to continually see through it. One of the points that I gathered from watching James Lindsay is that in many ways, he didn't say this, but this is what I learned from watching his migration, is that your God is the one thing you will not deconstruct. And so if you take on the religio of ever deconstruction, then you will never arrive anywhere. The point of seeing through things is to see something and to see something through the other things. And so perpetual deconstruction is in some ways just closing your eyes and ears. We want to be able to understand things, which sometimes means some deconstruction, but we do so in pursuit of Reformation. So I see we've got one person in the room, and you don't have your camera on. I don't know if you had a comment to make or if you're just in here listening. So all right, next question. All these short questions. All right, Matthias. Matthias, who's deep in the German estuary. When in 2022 will you go on your European tour with John Van Donk? Well, that depends on a few things. This is an aspiration that I have, but I haven't set up much. There's a variety of things that we could do. I should probably talk to my deacons. I don't want to give my deacons any extra work here at Living Stones because I'm down to one. I've got one deacon standing right now. And in fact, I've got two elders, one of which is in Africa at the moment, visiting her missionary son and her daughter and son-in-law. And the other deacon and elder team are a married couple. And so Livingstone stands on the precipice of Livingstone stands on the precipice right now. So I can't put any more on my one deacon because she's already doing what she can just to keep the church up. Now, hopefully in the next couple of months, we will bring in one or two more deacons to keep the church from the edge. And at some point then, I would probably want to do a little bit of fundraising and then plan out the European tour with John Van Donk. But we have no plans yet, but it could very well be 2022 might be the time to do it. After a visit to the Netherlands with a stopover at Job's house, a side trip to Heidelberg Castle, including a historical guided tour around the roots of the Heidelberg Catechism, is highly recommended. Would love nothing better. So when? I don't know. Let's try and put this thing together. Okay, Zito. What are your thoughts on the absolute either or that Christ requires? Matthew 12:30. Oh, now he's forcing me to open up my Bible software. And the salvation promised with it, particularly in relation to the hesitancy of popular post-Christian, post-atheist like Peterson and Vervaeke. Perhaps it is symptomatic of the late modern phenomena that David Bentley Hart at one point called the desire for transcendence without transcendence. Or maybe the West has just reverted from salvation to the merely therapeutic and or the tragic, excluding transhumanism. The hero's journey, Stoicism, Buddhism are very much tragic and therapeutic, not triumphant and salvific. What is the symbolic significance of the fact that it is the Magi, pagan astronomers? They're more than just astronomers. They were court magicians. You find the first Magi in the Bible in the book of Exodus. That's helpful to keep in mind. And shepherds who first found and worshipped Christ, and not members of the Jewish orthodoxy. I don't know about Jewish orthodoxy comment. I think that's a little unfair. It's also anachronistic. If you followed my sermons on Mary and Joseph, these were highly observant, consistently devoted people to the covenant. That comes clear in the Gospels, particularly Matthew. So in many ways, saying something like Jewish orthodoxy is an anachronism because you have to sort of weigh in Tom Holland's ideas about Judaism, Christianity, and the framing of these world religions within secularity. That's also an important thing to think about when you ask a question like this, because all tribalism is necessary. No, let me say that differently. Tribalisms are inevitable, but tribalisms are insufficient. Is there something inherent in orthodoxy that's a little vague? Large O orthodoxy would be the Orthodox segment of the church. Small O orthodoxy would be orthodoxy in general, but given the context of Jewish orthodoxy in the previous sentence, it's hard to know what you mean by that word in this case. Orthodoxies in general as sort of a categorical, I'd have to sort of read it in that vein. Is there something inherent in orthodoxy that binds the church from seeing the signs of Christ? What does this mean with regard to the second coming? Okay. Let me just quickly look at Matthew 12:30. Let's look at it in context. Then they brought him a demoniac who was blind and mute, and he cured him, so that the one who had been mute could speak and see. All the crowds were amazed and said, "Can you see? Can this be the son of David?" But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, "It is only by Beelzebub, the ruler of demons, that this fellow casts out demons." He knew what they were thinking and said to them, "Every kingdom divided itself is laid waste, and no city or house divided against itself will stand. If Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand?" Now, there are a lot of layers to that verse, because in it, I think Christ is also saying that Satan's kingdom is divided against itself. It can never be otherwise, and so it cannot stand. If I cast out demons by Beelzebub, by whom do your own exorcist cast them out? That's a sharp jab. Therefore, they will be your judges. And Jesus is so good at this. But if it is by the Spirit of Eric Weinstein asked Ross Douthat if Jesus were around today, would he just simply be memed out of existence? If you want to see the skill with which Jesus navigates a culture war, read the Gospels and understand that the Gospels are books that bear witness to a previous culture war that was very hot indeed. But if it is by the Spirit of God that I cast out demons, then the kingdom of God has come to you. Or how can one enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man? Because that's what Jesus is doing. He has bound the strong man, and he is plundering the hostages in the temple or in the home of Satan. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. Okay. And this is where you get into part of the issue of the book of Proverbs, because the book of Proverbs famously, Answer a Fool, has two proverbs next to each other that seem completely contradictory. Jesus basically will also say the inverse of this, which I think really locates this verse in some ways as a proverb. And, I know people have wondered about my calling Jordan Peterson the unauthorized exorcist, which is, I think, in my mind, if you want to somehow locate Jordan Peterson on a map derived from the Bible, I think that's the best way to see him. He is an exorcist. He has been casting out spirits. He cast out spirits from a whole generation. Now, once the spirits are cast out, either you fill the house with a stronger man, or you leave it vacant, sort of like every time I clear off the foundation of the Lord from a homeless encampment, every time I clear them out, new ones come. Now, just recently, one very regular member of the community I put in the mental hospital over the holidays, which was probably the best for him. He came back out manic and manic happy. And so he's been cleaning up garbage and sprucing things up. And I asked him this morning, when's the last time you slept? Oh, 3 days ago. I thought, yep, he's in his manic phase. 2 or 3 days from now, so his manic happy phase is about 12 noon. 2 or 3 days from now, he's going to be about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. 6 o'clock is total depression. His dangerous phases are 4, 4 and 5, and 7 and 8. And so 2 or 3 days from now, he's going to be 4 and 5 and 7 and 8. And he's stronger, and he can get really nasty when he's at 4 or 5 or 7 and 8. And he's going to clean out a lot of the homeless people. And you say, well, Paul, how do you know this? Because I've watched it time and time again. There's this great saying in Spanish. El diablo no es diablo por ser diablo. The devil isn't the devil because he's the devil. The devil is the devil because he's old. And he's seen a lot of patterns. And he knows the patterns. And it's part of the reason everybody loves Peugeot, because Peugeot is able to tap into, and same with Peterson, able to tap into very ancient patterns and able to apply and map those patterns onto the dynamics we see today. And wow, you're brilliant. Well, yeah, they are brilliant, but they're watching the patterns and they're just saying, it's all there. It's all there to see. You can see it too. So, therefore, I tell you, people will be forgiven every sin or blasphemy, but blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. Whoever speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but whoever speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in this age or in the age to come. And I'm sure at some point somebody's going to ask me again about verses 31 and 32. But in many ways, those verses exemplify the kinds of issues that are raised with questions such as divine election, issues of the binary versus the binary versus the analog. That's the metaphor that I often use. There is binary and there is analog. Your world has both. Your world has to have both. Sometimes the Bible speaks in antithetical terms. Thesis, antithesis. Read 1 John. The book of 1 John, where you get introduced to the spirit of Antichrist. It's all black and white, black and white, black and white, black and white. You cannot understand the world without understanding black and white. You have to also understand, gosh, the smoke is just horrible. Hang on a sec. I got to tell somebody to stop smoking or move away from the door. I'm drowning in here. You guys got to smoke further away. All that smoke gets sucked under my office door, and I can't stand it. And the local drug dealer's truck is out back there making a delivery. So, we're just in the full swing of things right now. So there's always both. And so when people want to, good. When people want to talk about the black and white things, are they in or out? And I turn to nuance and analog, they get frustrated. I want to know in and out. And I will have to say, I don't know in and out. Do I know categorically how to categorize them? No, I'm not God. I don't sit in his chair. In the process of time, it's very difficult to see categories. Now, we're so trained by modernity to imagine we can easily do so. And so that's when people get categorical and judgmental, and I think run the risk of playing God, because none of us know where things go. So that's my answer. We might now categorize post-Christian and post-atheist like Peterson and Vervaeke. 5 years from now, are Peterson and Vervaeke going to be in the Church of Jesus Christ? I wouldn't be surprised. So I'll say that. All right, let's go to the room now. You have something you want to say? Oh, okay. Let me up your volume a little bit here. Go ahead. Speak up. Yep. Hang on a second. You're going to have to repeat what you said because I had actually muted the room to get rid of distracting. So now, go all the way back and say the question again because the live stream didn't get the question.
So I was interested in the second half of the question and the Jewish leaders, and we recognise the Orthodox bit. It's out of time, and N.T. Wright knocked that one pretty much on the head, I think, as well. But it was interesting that you've got the Magi and the shepherds, who are the top and bottom of society, the most educated, the least educated, the smelliest, the most beautifully smelly, and so they represent every man between them, and everyone comes to Jesus in that sense. But the Jewish leaders, it was quite interesting. When he said that, I thought to myself, hold a minute. They were warned that Jesus was coming. They had the star in the sky. Don't look up. Comes to mind at this point, of course. And they also had the Magi coming, and they actually had the answer. They knew the prophecies. They knew what the prophecies were about Jesus. So the Jewish sort of intelligentsia and Herod, of course, had that warning. But they said to the Magi, who were foreigners and non-Jews, "Oh, you go off and have a look, and if it actually turns out to be something worthwhile, we'll follow on." They weren't actually willing to step out and say, "Oh, we're going to come with you." That's what interested me.
It's a great point. And I think that scales for all of us as well. and I think that in some ways, one of the things that you learn as a pastor is that people need. Why does God give us time? Why does God give us agency? I mean, agency and time are deeply connected, and they much more live in the world of analog rather than the world of binary, because agency is change and flow. And look at it with Nicodemus. We meet Nicodemus in John 3, and he's coming at night, and he's asking tentative questions, and he's trying to hedge his bets. And by the time Jesus is crucified, he's willing to step up with Joseph of Arimathea, both high status individuals with wealth, and say, we'll take his body. And in a sense, that says to all of their peers, we stand with Jesus. And in a culture war as hot as that one was, that was no small thing. So,
yeah, and in an authoritarian society to actually say, "Yeah, I'm going to just ask for the rebel's body," that's pretty brave.
Yes, it really is. All right, wonderful. Thank you, and thanks for jumping into the room. And because this is exactly why I'm playing with this method for answers like that, because you all get these questions provoke ideas in you, which is what makes this game fun. And I will miss things, and you'll have things that I disagree with, and vice versa. But that's why I want more conversation and less just monologue. So, not that I don't like to talk. So, okay, let's see. Back to the list. And now I can't find the list. There we go. Oh, we got quite a few. That was Zito. Kalepa. By the way, John and Kalepa had a really cool over 2-hour conversation on Rando's United about psychedelics. And I thought Kalepa's story was really helpful. So just a little ad. Curious what your thoughts are. Someone's smoking again. I gotta deal with this. Sorry. No smoking up here. I'm dying in here. All this stuff gets sucked in under the door. So if you want to smoke, go out there. Thank you. How are you doing, Paul? Good. Talking about psychedelics, first it was tobacco, and now it's the pot. Yeah, I told, it's so funny. I told them, I said, we're building a fence. Oh, that's a good idea. And it's like, you say it's a good idea, but when that fence comes up, you're really going to be angry. And I said, someone gave the money to build the fence because they're tired of seeing an encampment against their church. Oh gosh, this room is so full of pot. So if my answers get a little crazy today, it's because the drug dealer made his stop and is hanging out with. Yeah. All right. I'll try to clear my mind. Curious what your thoughts are, if any, on David Brenner, writer of Desiring God's Will. Or David Benner. Desiring God. I think I read some of those books 20 years ago. They were really hot then, but I don't really have any thoughts right now. So, Manuel's in the room. He doesn't have his camera on, so I'll keep going. Did you want to say something, Manuel?
Do I want to say something? Well, I need to get caught up in the context first.
Oh, okay. So here's how this room works. So the room is exactly, for people like you who, when I answer a question that you want to have input in. So unlike a lot of the other rooms in the Discord, keep your camera off. And if you want to talk, then turn your camera on, and that way I know you want to talk. So that's how we're gonna work that room. All right. Is it PVK? Is it Ask PVK at Question Day? It wasn't on Christmas Eve, but it is today. That was an easy one. Shane, the non-fungible person. Oh, he answered the question. Is it okay for Christians to go into VR while waiting for Jesus to come back? Yeah, I think so. Chris Pacow. Can you do a live reaction video to the short ecumenical promotion quip? This video was a fun one. Chris did a pretty excellent job trying to advertise. Jacob made an appearance. We have some Roman clips, and then we have Chad the alcoholic with his dance, and Chris would like Chad to be Pope. So that's what that video is about. There you go. There you go, Chris. Free advertising right on my channel. All right, T-Mart. In reference to your discussion of the Brockman tweet, I have a blunt and I think difficult question. Why shouldn't all of the psychological evidence he has amassed simply be taken as supporting the projection theory? The Brockman tweet. Brockman himself seemed almost giddy in talking about the wondrous effects of praying to the Father God as if God existed, and you wholeheartedly supported him in this. It's referring to a Twitter conversation that I am not recalling. Why shouldn't we see him as knowing and gleefully hoodwinking himself? Fooling yourself is not always a bad thing. Because if the part of you that is deceived is fooled in reverse, it might be taking you in a better direction. But I don't remember the Brockman tweet that you're talking about here. So, and one thing is important to always keep in mind, when you're on Twitter. You're on Twitter. It's by definition shallow. Which is why I am. So I have a Substack, and I use the Substack for trying to make deeper points than Twitter can hold. All right, Teddy M. On yesterday's live stream, prediction for 2022, Father Steve, he is on the Discord, because he got into the Discord, of course he is, mentioned that American Orthodoxy is starting to get momentum from the immigrants that came to the U.S. in the last 30 years. And maybe the future of the Orthodox Church will be an example of how to bring different nationalities together under one dominion, in similar fashion as Catholics, but without the historical baggage with its conflict with Protestants. My question is, which of the three Christian churches, Orthodox, Catholics, or Protestant, is more suitable to incorporate in its fold Christianity's smaller sister, Islam? Wow. Oh, what a question. What a question. And here is the questioner himself in the room. Why don't you talk a little bit more about your question, Teddy?
I wanted to give my neck to the chopping block.
And you live in Israel, so wow.
Yeah, that's why it was so interesting to me, because I think I don't remember where I read it. I think in Tom Holland that part of what Christianity doing is embracing other tradition and making them their own. And if I remember correctly, it was part of the way how incorporated the German tribes, that there were a warrior Jesus and a fighter that can conquer other places, and I thought it was very interesting that maybe because there are so many similarities with Islam, and they're both, as Jordan's saying, is the people of the book, all the three major religions, and I thought that with time maybe we will still have our own small culture and languages, but there'll be some kind of unification. I don't know. Maybe that's just a scientific and science fiction question, but
I don't
was
think it
curious
is.
to hear your.
I take your question seriously. Now, and the analog that I use for that is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When I read Tom Holland's In the Shadow of the Sword, which is Tom Holland's stab at the history, in a modernist sense, that gave rise to Islam, it makes a fair amount of sense. Well, of course it does. It's from modernity, and so it would make sense to a modernist. So the Mormons are pretty clearly an offshoot of Christianity that has a great deal in common with Islam. It's just a number of centuries later. Mormonism might have become Islam, and might still perhaps, if it can, let's say, I don't know, take charge of the American government and use American military power to bring Mormon teaching throughout the world. Now, there are issues with that. There's lots of issues with that. But if you get a sense of C.S. Lewis in his answers to his letter to Sheldon Van Auken talked about the fact that in some ways Christianity is universalized Judaism, which there's a lot of truth to that. And he says in some ways Buddhism is simplified Brahmanism. Okay. And then he says Islam is in some ways simplified Christianity. And so if you look at Tom Holland's In the Shadow of the Sword, there's a lot of fringe. Tom Holland basically says, if you look at what put Islam together, there's a lot of the stuff that was pushed to the fringes of the late antiquity Christian church stuff, you know, their particular brand of monotheism and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff at the fringes that then basically comes in. And so in some ways, Islam is simplified Christianity and Judaism. And the Mormon church, the LDS church, in many ways is sort of simplified, streamlined 19th century folk Christianity. Because if you look at the burned over district in upstate New York, where a whole bunch of groups came out of, you know, the LDS church is one of the churches that really took off. Now, of those churches that left the burned over district, you've got Seventh-day Adventists. Seventh-day Adventists are already well on the way to becoming part of the Christian mainstream. And in many ways, they already have. You've got the Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, they're still sort of out there. But if you look at Jehovah's Witnesses and Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Islam, there are interesting similarities between all of them, even though Islam is from a very different part of the world in a very different century. And one of the things that Richard Mao, who was a professor of mine at Calvin College, he was president of Fuller Seminary, it's kind of a guiding light in the Christian Reformed Church. He, for a while now, has been trying to get Mormon scholars in dialogue, because what he has noted is that as Mormon scholarship develops, he sees the drift back towards Orthodox Christianity. And so even though the Seventh-day Adventists, they're further down the road, the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons are still a little bit further out, Richard Mao thinks they will at some point also come in. But remember, religions move slowly. Now, Islam, given its size, its breadth, the success it has achieved in a whole variety of ways, that might take a very long time. But I love your question, and I think you're right. I think at some point it will come in. Now, in terms of the question of orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Protestantism,
maybe that was ignorant, the three aspects of Christendom, that Catholicism and Orthodoxy and Protestantism, because you managed to break it down much in smaller pieces that maybe I don't see yet.
Well, but I think it's helpful to understand differences between Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Protestantism. Protestantism is, boy, I'm surprised I don't get in more trouble for what I say. But I'm a Protestant, and Protestantism is in some ways the ragged fringe of the Christian church. Protestantism is all about fast modernist experimentation, and experimentation in deep conservatism, such as, let's say, the Amish, and it's experimentation in wild rootlessness, like in how many different things. So I would imagine that even though there are ways in which, just by virtue of geography and history, Orthodox and Islam can probably understand each other better because they have so much joint history.
The Russians and the Muslim countries have very good relationships.
Yeah, they can understand each other.
Additionally,
Yeah, and
I just cut it. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think I probably disagree. I think Protestants, and actually the less sacramental Protestants, would be more in with the Muslims, because I think, I would say that more than Christianity, Islam is more influenced by Judaism. I think because that one God, that's their hand symbol, the one God.
Right.
So I think,
and you're finishing my sentence, because I think in terms of how they would actually go, they'll come in through the Protestant door, also because of the deep impact that Protestantism has had in the world via colonialism. So go ahead, John. I'm sorry. You can finish your thought.
No, it's fine. I guess I would say that it's the sacraments and it's the one God, and I think they're closer to Judaism there. But obviously, it's definitely still Christian influences. But then sacramentally, I would say they're very, low church Protestant. I mean, I'm from a Pentecostal background, actually, by the name. I'm now a Baptist, church now. And I can see Muslims who are against sacramental, who how can God's grace be in a sacrament? I can see them going to a more Baptist rather than,
Yeah, I could see that too. Go ahead. Anybody else? If you can turn on your camera, it helps me remember you better. John. But you might have reasons for keeping it off, which are fine. But
Yes, sorry, I'd rather keep it off.
that's part of the
I'm
reason
only a college student.
I encourage turning on cameras on the Discord, because once I see your face, I know you as a person better than Winnie the Pooh and an avatar. But there are good reasons on the internet to stay anonymous. I get that too. So go ahead.
We appreciated the Christmas Winnie the Pooh. Having worked in, having lived in a Muslim country for a decade or so, it's
Excuse me, which one?
Uzbekistan.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm Russian speaking as well as English speaking and Uzbek speaking, and so it's really interesting that I think what on an institutional level, the Orthodox Church there, which is Russian, which had been the colonial power, and Islam worked reasonably well together. There was not a lot of clashes between them, but that's because they very clearly saw, this is my community and that's your community, and we don't see any sort of interaction or drifting between, to a large extent. But the Protestants had a different issue, that they of course were seen as more aggressive by Islam. But I think also the people who were leaving Islam were coming towards Protestantism rather than towards Orthodoxy.
That makes sense.
Quite a lot of friends who made that journey.
Part of the thing to remember is that religions are so broad and so deep that what actually emerges will always be surprising, interesting, complex, and what you said, because I look at just, because there's, in some ways, the, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in many ways, they're polytheists. When you sort of look at the trajectory of their, that they don't like to hear that, but the trajectory of their narrative is very polytheistic in a sense. But
sorry, Paul, for us who don't know, they're like the Baham religion?
No, Mormons. Oh gosh.
No, I know Mormons, but you said Mormons something.
Mormon isn't the name they prefer. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay.
That's the official title of their church.
Thank you for clarifying.
And one of my best homeless friends is a truly devout Mormon, and so he's always lecturing me on how I've really got to improve, because before the restraining order against him, he would come in and listen to sermons and he'd give me a little bit of critique of how my sermons were falling short of the Mormon faith. But when I look at Mormons, and I have very little connection with too many Muslims, but there's some real interesting similarities, especially in terms of their approach to the book. It's fascinating. So I don't know. You guys probably know way more about this than I do. But anyway,
Can I say one more thing?
Keep going.
Sorry. Yeah, I know you did a commentary on the Mohammed hijab conversation with Jordan Peterson, and I was just so struck at how modernist he was, and maybe that was him just being a university student, but he's quite traditional. He is very, because I used to follow him quite a lot, listen to his popular videos, because I listen to the other side, David Wood and those sort of videos, which are very polemical, very controversial. But I was thinking maybe Islam is quite modernist, and that is why they would be more fitted to a Protestant church, like a Baptist church, something like that. Like, obviously, they want to get back to the Islamic texts, like Protestants want to get back to the book. But yeah.
Well, thank you for answering my question.
It was a great question. Sam, did you have something you wanted to say in it, or did you just want in on the feed?
I want in on the feed. What in the world are we talking about? Is it the Trinity? I've got some thoughts.
No,
are we talking about? There was something about Islam, right?
It's which branch of Christianity will absorb Islam: the Orthodox, the Catholics, or the Protestants?
Protestants. There's too much bad beef between the Orthodox and the Catholics and the Muslims. right? Like people forget this. People are like, man, the Catholics, that was so mean of you guys to go on crusades and stuff like that. The Byzantine Empire had an active wartime border with the Muslim Empire for almost a straight millennium. Like like the number of Muslims killed by Catholics is like this, and the number of Muslims killed by Orthodox is just like off the charts. But the Muslims got the last laugh because Istanbul was once Constantinople, as they say. But I think I mean,
Yeah, they basically
Muslims
absorbed
all
the whole
Islam.
of Orthodox Christianity into Islam, except for the tiny minority who refused to change.
Right, yeah, and Islam is mostly made up of former Christian lands, and people also forget like Iraq in 1900 was something like 70% Christian, right? A lot of the lands that we think of as the Middle East and solidly Muslim lands were Christian, and even for a very long time after the Muslim conquest, the Muslims are oftentimes just the elites and the rulers, and then it slowly kind of made its way down into a mostly Christian population from there. So Islam, for the record, has stolen a lot more Christians than vice versa. But I I would find it unlikely that Muslims, especially if they have a very strong aniconic, upbringing, not trusting images and stuff like that. I think they would find Catholicism to be a hard sell, in the same way that Protestants do, but they get that beaten into them even more than that. And I think someone else already said that Muslims are so scriptural and so text focused that they would find Protestantism more familiar and more compelling, probably in that sense. And also, Protestants still send a lot more missionaries. Like, what percentage of the missionaries that are undercover in the Islamic world are Protestant versus not Protestant? I bet it's like 10 to 1 at least, maybe even like 100 to 1, Protestant missionaries to non-Protestant missionaries. So um, that would be my thought on that subject.
I think
All right.
that although you may say so, and I couldn't possibly comment on that last bit, Sam. I think the other interesting thing is the way that people go from Christianity to Islam, and that's also a big thing. I mean, there's a lot of it. I think it's probably less now. It seems to be less now, but there was a lot of it just after 9/11, and a lot of it was about, I want to be actively doing something that's against my society, the way my society is currently.
Well,
And I want
there's a
to jump
lot of
away.
conversion to like, just in the same way there's like ortho curiosity going on, there's a lot of Islamic curiosity going on in the West.
Yeah.
And I actually think that part of YouTube seems bigger than the ortho curious part of YouTube. The Islamic channels in English that have a lot of Islamic converts from Christianity or just kind of secular Western backgrounds, that seems to be a bigger internet space than sort of ortho land. And I've been sort of dabbling in that. I've had 4 or 5 Islamic guests on my channel, and it's easier for a Unitarian to talk to Muslims than Trinitarians, which, anyway,
Sam's gonna go Islam. I knew it. I knew it.
No.
Sam,
Hey.
come while you have the chance. Don't dally. They'll suck you in.
When you're the bridge between two things, you don't know which way the traffic is going to necessarily flow. Is it how many Muslims might be open to Christianity if they knew there was a non-Trinitarian form of it? That's sort of part of my point. But I can also, I kind of like Muslims. That I enjoy talking to them, and I don't find them nearly as offensive or as wrong as most Christians. So, but
You just ruined your relationship with Anselman. It's toast now, Sam. It's toast.
He still watches my channel, and he knows I have Muslim guests on. He knows what I talk to them about. So I love you, Anselman, but I just don't see. I think Islam is basically just a minor heresy off of Jewish Christianity. Back in the Arabian Peninsula, there was still active forms of Jewish Christianity that were Torah keeping and followed the law, thought Jesus was a human, and God was one. Didn't like the semi-idolatrous practices of ortho Christianity, And I'm pretty sure that Muhammad was pretty strongly exposed to that form of Christianity. And I think he originally thought that he was a prophet in that tradition, and sort of slowly over time had a slightly stronger and different identity as being apart from that. And really, I think that Islam, like Jewish Christianity, has gone extinct, and or it's the second biggest religion in the world. And so I don't think of Islam as different from Christianity as most Christians for obvious reasons, but I don't know. I hope that the Christian world and the Muslim world can get along better, and I don't think that we need to defend that propositional border as harshly as we do.
Wow.
But
Anybody else
there's
on
still a
this?
Oh, come at me if you think I'm wrong. Come at me.
Go ahead, Teddy.
there's still a problem because that Tom Holland mentioned that modernity and West developed in Christian countries and Muslim countries stayed behind, and there's a lot of resentment. And well, I don't know if it's a question or it just I'm strengthening Sam's point that there's a lot of historical baggage.
I hear Teddy. I hear Teddy in Israel saying, "You can't handle the truth." Sam, on this.
Well, yeah. Like it's difficult. Like it's difficult. It's difficult to have them across the border, and it's difficult to fight. But I think it's difficult to fight with any people. I don't know.
If
I-
you take the go ahead.
I'm just telling like a small story that I told before. Like when I went to the military, I was an infantry, and in basic camp, yeah. When you train to be a fighter, they
camp.
tell they thank you. They give you like small jobs and go to protect some small community on Sabbath. And I think I was like 3, 4, 5 months into the service, and they sent me to Hebron. And I remember just as we arrived, our bus came to the place. Yes, bye. And they sent me to the post, and I standing there in the post, and I heard it was at evening, and I heard the muazzin, and it was something that I never heard before. It was all across the city in a huge roar, and I was terrified. I was so terrified. I was standing there with my gun and just looking all around, thinking that I'm being attacked, or like the wrath of the Arab world would crush on me there. And it was unnerving, but I got used to it. First, I just started to get annoyed because it didn't. It interrupted my sleep as a soldier, and it was really, really annoying when they started to chant at 5 in the morning. But now, when I'm a little bit older, I see it as something of extreme beauty. I see it as the same thing as the bells that we hear sometimes in Europe, the big, big bells that struck, and you feel this sense of awe. And that's beautiful. I wish they don't do it with the recording. I wish there were a guy who go to this green tower and just shout it from the gut of his body. And I wish it was like that, but they still play a recording, and it's still pretty. And I don't know. It's just a small story to add to that.
That's a good story.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the situation is different in the Middle East, or especially Israel, where there's a lot of ethnic, tribal, and national identity connected with militaries with weapons pointed at each other. Whereas in the US, like my wife and I went out for Pakistani food about a week ago and drove down, about 20 minutes to the Pakistani neighborhood, and it was delicious. And most of the people in there are Pakistani, and a fair amount of them are wearing headscarves and such. And then we go back home to our house, right? And, no one's pointing any weapons at each other or anything like that. And there's no national animosity. And a lot of this, I don't know, I guess people being attracted to Islam is happening. I think it's especially common in the UK for whatever reason. And then there's some amount of it in the United States. But it's interesting, Islam won't be able to come to the United States or the UK without being affected by the strong acid of secular Christianity and then the more overt forms of actual Christianity. But I'm generally optimistic that I don't see why there would be any barrier or reason why Muslims couldn't be a well integrated cooperative part of a country like the United States, or that we really have anything to fear from them at the end of the day. And on the contrary, I think that a lot of Muslim immigrants are very grateful to be in the United States and to be escaping often forms of tyranny and oppression, because we forget the most common oppressor of Muslims is a different sort of Muslim in their own country. And a lot of the most common form of violence that Muslims experience is from other Muslims. And the most common target of Islamic terrorists is other Muslims, right? And then they can come here and they can come to the United States, they can leave that behind, and they can make restaurants that have delicious food and that sort of thing. Because the neighborhood that has the Pakistani restaurants that I was talking about, you drive 2 more blocks and it's the Hasidic Jewish neighborhood. Those sort of animosities are not there. So I don't know. I guess I'm unusual among Christians and conservative Americans in being somewhat pretty Islamophilic, philia or something like that. I don't find them as weird or as dangerous. But Anselman, you are right that they ignore the cross and they ignore the atonement, and I agree with you on that, Anselman. So I'll throw that out.
Like I come from Europe, from Flanders, so we have a bit of a different experience with Muslim populations here on the continent. It's a lot more hostile most of the time. It's like to the United States, you usually get more immigrants that can better integrate. Here we often have the problems like ghettos are a real in certain places in Brussels you don't want to go to for extremist reasons. It's a different experience that we have here. It's not that easy. So it's different than what you have in the United States. It's also here a lot more tribal to a degree, and also in the sense that a lot of them are third generation, and they are usually the worst in a certain way because they don't have an identity. They are cut off from being Flemish, but they are also no longer Moroccan, Syrian, or the like, or Turkish especially. So they live in that in-between space, and that creates a lot of conflict here between.
So Volpes, why do you think that in the U.S. we don't have the problem with Islamic
It's what
ghettos?
Paul said. It's what Paul said on the video with Elon Musk. The piece that he brought from the conversation, the quote that when you have culture that is not confident in its values, then it's a problem. And Europe is not confident with the religious problems as the US. And that's the difference.
That's a very true. There is no driving force here to really integrate them, to make them part of your country. There is nobody. They don't want it. We don't really want it. Like I said, the third generation doesn't have a real identity, so it's a real conflict.
That's fascinating.
So
I would agree with that. As an Englishman, it's very similar here, but it's almost like the Church of England is very passive, and before it would have been evangelical and like really passionate about it. But it's almost like going back to my comparison to the Protestant Islam to the Protestant religion. It's like the evangelical religion now is not the evangelical religion before, not Protestantism. It's now Islam, and obviously, as we've been talking about, that's causing conflict. Anyway, I'm going to duck out now. Thank you. Nice to speak with you guys.
Thanks, John. Thanks for John. Any other on this? I want to go to another question. So
maybe I can, like a friend of mine is a Muslim, but he's probably going to convert. Like he's really doubting it. He converted from being a Jehovah's Witness to Islam because of problems with, like, he could no longer hold that position. But the thing is, like, Islam itself has a problem with really integrating somebody into it. It's a lot of the time it's just like you say the Shahada, you're part of the, you're now a Muslim, but they don't go the extra miles. You're left to dry. Like a lot of converts, Western converts, they leave after between 1 and 3 years, they just disappear. Like and he converted with a few dozen other people. None of them are left. He's the last convert left in that town. So it doesn't have that, like even Islam here doesn't really have its own like real identity, like real strengths of conviction. It doesn't go, it's skin deep. Like that can lead to sometimes to the radicalization to the degree that they do terroristic like acts and the like, but it doesn't go deep into them. They just don't they just don't live it in the way that they do it, for example, in Egypt or the like. It's that, yeah, it's very unstable footing they are on.
Could I ask a small follow-up question, Paul, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
So do you think that part of the fact that America can integrate Muslims well is because it kind of stood up for itself? Do you think almost a weird, ironic legacy of the war on terror, where America was very much kind of fighting against Islam for a while, helped it seem self-assertive in a way that almost paradoxically helps it integrate Muslims in that way?
But also in general, you get a much better quality of immigrants to the United States than we get into Europe. A lot of the like immigrant populations were we call them guest workers, gastarbeiders, like especially from rural eastern Turkey, like the more conservative parts, the more rural parts, and they just don't integrate that well. Like usually with Western Turks, there aren't many problems, but it's those Eastern Turks that really hold on. And then of course we have like the Moroccan, like organized crime is also usually led by Moroccans or Turks. There are a lot of conflicts here in the harbors in Antwerp or Limburg. Like that's also another factor, that they are also quite involved in our organized crime. It also makes it a lot more difficult and gives us the association also like with them and crime. It's like for example, I know that in British Columbia, like for example, there you have the Somalis and they're associated also with crime because they're also the organized crime. And here for us here it's the Moroccans and the Turks, and that also creates more conflict. Also another way for them to get into to rebel into conflict with the law. Like I said, there are areas in Brussels where like you have need police to protect the police when they go on an assignment in those neighborhoods. So it's just a lot of problem. And also we aren't that confident in our culture. We don't really have a culture anymore. It's very like there is nothing assertive. There is no drive. For example, almost all our political parties, they don't celebrate Christmas in a way, like they don't do a statement like Merry Christmas or like of Happy Easter. They do it for Ramadan, they do it for Hanukkah, but not Christianity. It's just like you don't speak about it. There is no assertive drive to say like we are Flemish or we are Europeans and we are proud of that fact. It just gets ignored. It just goes quiet.
We need to save our father from the whale. We'll need to bring our tradition back.
All right. Unwound History, you jumped in. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I mean, it would be tangential now. It's similar. It's a very difficult topic, and now I'm on the stage, right? So how do I enter?
All right. Well, good. Well, this was wonderful, and it's what happened right here, right now, which is exactly what I was looking for by opening up this room and playing around with this process. So again, part of the reason why we're doing the question and answer, for those of you who have come later, here in this room rather than the usual room with no cameras and just me on camera, yada, 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 is because when there is a question, especially if you're present in the Discord when your question comes up, you can fill in your question a little bit better. And then as with, there's a lot more expertise, there's a lot more lived experience, there's a lot more information out there in the community than I have. And it's our ability to go deeper on a question like this, which I think we just had in a productive way, which is why doing a question and answer, let's say in the context of a community, is better than just doing it with a talking head and a list of questions and me yammering on the internet, because yammer is what I'll do. So, all right, good. I'm going to go to the next question. And again, as I said, if you're going to be in this room is limited to 9. So if the question isn't of any interest to you and you don't anticipate having anything to add, it's best to leave the room. If you are going to stay in the room, turn your camera off, and then I'll know when someone has something to say, they'll turn their camera on, and then I'll get a chance to call on you and bring you into the conversation. That's how we're working this. All right, next question. I have to find the questions again. Okay. Oh boy, the questions have stacked up. So it'll take us a little while to catch up with the questions. That was a great question, Teddy. WV Pilgrim. What type of hole is the hole in the culture left by the church? As in a hole in cloth, maybe from a rip or moths. A hole in the ground, which may have been dug intentionally or resulted from erosion. Or maybe like a hole in the donut, a space sacrificed for expansion of the dough. The kingdom is like yeast. Boy, that's a great question. I did so part of what I'm experimenting with on the channel, and kind of in conjunction with my clips channel, is we're doing more and more of these long, hodgepodgey, less thematic, less organized videos. And so I'm taking snippets out of here, and if I think they're clear enough for my channel at least, I'll throw them up on my channel. And if I see them as just pieces of something I might want to use at a later date, I'll throw them on my clips channel along with other clips that I reap from other channels. And so the clips channel is not, it's only got 500 subs. It's not monetized. I will probably never monetize the clips channel. And that way I could just take raw clips from Jordan Peterson or something else, just throw them on the clips channel. Doesn't matter. The clips channel is in some ways my workbench. And this channel is a workbench too. It's a little more refined than the clips channel. So it's all part of sort of a process. And so a lot of, again, why and how I use my channel is as a process area where I can, sort of like this estuary, I can throw things into the water here, and some of you will swim in and interact with what I've thrown in the water, and that improves our knowledge and our wisdom. So all of this is in a sense about a process. And as I was trying to digest the Four Horsemen of Meaning video, it was dawning on me that, again, most of us religious types will assert that a culture needs every culture has a religious foundation, and every culture needs a Christian, or every culture needs a religious center. And with Kanye West, who is on obviously his own journey with over religion, this land he bought up in Wyoming, this town he wants to build, he will have a worship space. He will have his cathedral, his church at the center of his town. In a medieval society, you had the church at the center of the community. In American cities, we have these commercial buildings as the downtown, the center of our cities. And that's fairly religious. And so as modernity recedes, there is a hole left in as modernity recedes, and I think as Mark noted the other day in the impromptu live stream, there's a hole that's left in the middle. And what kind of hole is it? I think it's, and the image I have is much more of the high point, and it dries up, but it's got to be inverted. And when water recedes, it stays in the hole. So it's a hole. It's not like a donut. Erosion is more of it, because it's a process. So in the Christian Reformed Church, we have these puddles. And Ripon, California is a puddle. And Grand Rapids is the deepest puddle, and Chicago is a fairly deep pond. When there's a drought in an ecosystem, the fish gather in the deepest, coolest parts of the pond, and other parts are evaporating. And right now what's happening in the Christian Reformed Church is that the ponds that were world-class cities, northern New Jersey, where I grew up, Chicago, but that's close to Grand Rapids, and it's also Midwest. In our classis, which is a region of the church, the churches in the Bay Area are dying quickly. Our attempt at planting churches in the Sacramento area was in some ways an attempt to go in and dig a swimming pool, dig a little artificial pond, a cement pond, as I said, on the Beverly Hillbillies, here in Sacramento. And I'd say that our results are middling to poor, and as time goes on. And so the hole left in the culture is definitely a hole left by a recession. It's exposed by the recession of modernity, but it is also the recession of the church. So it is a spot where, in order for the entire ecosystem to function properly, you need a living, vibrant community. Now, that community will have institutional aspects, but you need something operating there. And it's interesting what was said by Ayan Hirsi Ali, that, in the clip I played from the Jordan Peterson conversation, where she asserted in frustration, you Europeans aren't enculturating the immigrants, in a sense, to a degree of irony. You're not colonizing the immigrants like you should to your religion. You're not converting them. Your religion is too weak, and so in some ways, perhaps, the hole in European culture is leading to others filling the hole. And I know in Europe there's an anxiety about Islam, about Europe becoming is another Islamic continent, because at least the Muslims believe in their religion. And I think, again, back to of the videos that I released, the videos I released last week were quite a bit more popular. Not quite a bit. They got more attention than usual, and the Elon Musk one took off like crazy. Now, sometimes when something takes off, it's just kind of because it kind of hooks into our limbic BSing systems. But that Elon Musk, the end of the Elon Musk interview clearly hit a nerve. And I remember when I started this channel, I wondered why anybody would bother listening to me. And some of the friends that I've made in the process have said, well, you still believe. Oh, how do you know I still believe? Because I'm willing to go on the internet and say I believe that Christ physically rose from the grave, that when I profess the Apostles' Creed, I continue to believe in a second coming. I continue to believe in he will come to judge the living and the dead. I am a crunchy creedal Christian. And if I think I were a mainline pastor who was little more than quiveringly available and affirming, and for this reason, I'm having a conversation with a church that's leaving our denomination, and I'm trying to obviously encourage them to stay. But their fears that the Christian Reformed Church is going to go full affirming of same-sex relationships, and I don't think it will. And I don't think it will because not because of the rightness and wrongness of the issue, although that is not arbitrary, but because of the fact that at least those who oppose it show more life than many who are sort of floating along with the program. And I think that's at the heart of Tom Holland's point about the church and COVID. Now, I'm not a COVID skeptic. I've been vaccinated. In church, we wear masks, although we're not hard-nosed about it. At the same time, those churches that have been antithetical to the issue demonstrate something in their rigor of opposing it and opposing the national narratives. Now, to the degree that they have audience capture about the antithetical, I mean, you can be tribal in two ways. But at least they demonstrate that perhaps there's something alive underneath that is willing to inconvenience themselves and take social, economic, and relational risks in order to achieve something. Because if your religion is such that you are not willing to risk anything for it, then the entire world knows you don't value it yourself. And it's for that reason that, generally speaking, countercultural religions do better unless there is some kind of disastrous tyranny that is going to physically kill them, which of course happens. And it's the risk of that actually energizes the interest and attention in those crunchy religions. And I think in terms of Sam's point about all of the Islamic curious people, well, here in the United States, to identify as a Muslim is in the very broad mixture, and it's a very complex mixture, because you'll get points from the progressives and the woke for identifying that way. Unless you stand up and say, and I keep my women at home in a hijab and I don't let them drive the car, well, suddenly the wokesters are going to be reeling a little bit. So there's a lot going on with this, but the hole in the culture left by the church is a hole left, in some ways, the inversion of a drought. That in a drought, the deepest puddles maintain the water and the fish. The hole in the culture is because of water has, the living water has gone away, and Peterson has other language for it. We're continuing to feed from the corpse of our dead ancestors. And if the culture is going to continue, there needs to be new living culture made that energizes. So that's the best I can answer that question. I'm sure there's people want to jump in on this.
Yeah. So I want to jump in and like address the question, part of the question that said, was this dug intentionally or resulted from erosion? I think this was dug intentionally. Like the Enlightenment men, they knew what they were doing. And many of them were Freemasons. And Freemasonry comes from alchemy. And alchemy, in a way, is this same modern fantasy that you're going to somehow reach God through the material means. So in a way, this replacement of religion for modernity, for scientism, is in a way the first hole that led us into postmodernity. In a way, I'd say that modernity is inherently fascistic because it proposes a view of truth that will never ever lead to truth. So it's like God without God, God without incarnation, God as a story, God as an objective description of the world. But I think in this, Peugeot is completely right. You don't get to fly by with just a description. You need God to actually be there, and heaven and earth meet.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and what I also was going to say, like, the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. And that's what, like, especially here and about, like, people my age, like, 21, like, and a bit higher and younger, apathy is, like, the best description of most people. People just don't care. It's like, whatever, like this gets me a bit angry for history reasons, but historical reasons. For example, language is very important in Belgium and Flanders. Like Flemish was an oppressed language for a good while of Belgian history, of Flemish history. Like but there are today people who say, like, I prefer, like, why did we learn a stupid language like Flemish? Why couldn't we, like, learn English when we are born? Why do we have to deal with something like this? And it's that whole, like, attitude of, like, not caring about who you are in the world, like where you come from. Now also in Flanders, because, like, we kicked all of the Dutch Calvinists out during the Counter-Reformation, so they're now all up in Zeeland and in Utrecht and the other places up north. Flanders and Belgium in general, the southern Netherlands, we were in, like, a Catholic heartland for since the Counter-Reformation. Like Quebec, Ireland, and Flanders were, like, the Catholic places of the world, and the church had, up until the 90s, it was an institution with power that's, like, it's hard to describe, in the sense that, for example, I come from a Catholic, like, family, in the sense that we had the concept called pillarization, which means that society was, and you probably know this about the Netherlands, had kind of the same, society was ideologically divided. It was in a vertical pillars, division of society. I was a Catholic, you could be a liberal or a socialist. If you were a Catholic or in the Christian pillar, you were, of course, you went to church, you were baptized, but everything you did in life was within that pillar, within that structure. Your bank was a Catholic bank, you read Catholic newspapers, you went to a Catholic youth movement like a Scouts, you like your cultural associations were Catholic. Every aspect of society, like your union was Catholic, your like small business employee association was Catholic. Everything was Catholic. Everything was structured in a pillar. You had the same with the socialists, with the liberals. So our society was very rigid and structured in that way. Like all the things you got to do. Catholics went to the Catholic universities. Liberals and socialists went to the government universities. It was very structured, but that started to fall apart. Fell first apart in the Netherlands about the 70s. Pillarization basically went away. Here it lasted till the 90s, but from that moment on it was basically a free-for-all. We still live in the remnants of those pillars. Like, for example, because of my family backgrounds, I did all those things. And also out of habits, we go to this organization, but slowly but steadily, they lost their identity as being a Catholic or a socialist or a liberal association. They started to become really like broadening their like no longer ideological, no longer philosophical. And that's really started to dissolve our society. So since the 90s, we don't really have an identity anymore. Like, what does it mean to be Flemish these days? There is nothing to hold you to. There is no structure anymore. Like, it's all been washed away, and here that's especially that whole that exists. Of course, there are like elements like Flemish nationalism, but also had their history and the like. But in general, it's just one empty hole of nothing, you could say. Just some governments, like just some remnants where you live in. Nothing more than that.
Interesting. Thank you. That's very interesting, because the Dutch Calvinists who came to America in either the end of the 19th century wave, when my family came.
We talked about this, about them willing their own unions, and like it's like it is here in the Netherlands. You had the Catholic pillar, the Protestant pillar, and then you had also the secular pillar.
Yep.
Like socialist pillar didn't really exist there. But the thing is also with these pillars were extremely totalizing in the sense, like, for example, the province where I live, West Flanders, up until I think the 80s, the Christian Democrat Party, or the Catholic Party, got more than 50-60% of the votes. Here, for example, in Catholic provinces in the Netherlands, up until the 70s, the Catholic Party got 80% of the votes in those provinces. Like, it's all layers of society, from your lowliest laborer to your highest businessman. Everything was integrated in that way. It was a completely totalizing thing.
Yep. Anybody else in the room? I see WV. Go ahead, Teddy.
The question was that the church left a hole, but maybe there's a little bit different problem, because usually when I listen, I listen a lot to Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan used this argument quite a lot. Like, if we just were three of us, you, me, and Jamie in an island, then there will be no problem. I won't say like don't smoke weed. Why should I say to Jamie? And we can all get along. And the problem is usually because it doesn't scale. It doesn't scale to incorporate society, to incorporate a lot of people. Because when we have a personal connection, I can deal with your problems. But if it goes beyond the number, it's difficult. So we build structures to do it. We build countries, we build kings, we build, like, however I can call it, psychotechnologies. We develop those, and maybe the church and other things. One of the problems that we maybe encountered during the last 100 years, that we grew up in scale so much, and maybe our old institutions did not cope to deal with that. And it's not the problem that the church had something wrong with it. It's just we stumbled upon a new block of scale. And now we need to adjust, and the combinatoric explosions is crazy. We don't know how to even to decide which cereal to buy.
Yeah. That's true.
So that's maybe a point of view that, I don't know, different a little bit.
Okay, good. All right, anything else on this question? Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking of it as, maybe the church kind of had a certain way of thinking, and there was no, I guess what science brought was a different way of thinking, which is like a proof that you need to have, where church started with some answers and worked that way. But once science came in, it became so useful that it kind of took over. So the whole was kind of left by, people passing away, and you're kind of born with a round hole, and then church is this square peg that doesn't fit into that hole. So I think science is useful. We can't think of church in the way we did before science, because now we have this new kind of way of seeing the world. So we need to incorporate both of them in some way. But those are my thoughts on that.
Okay, thanks. All right, go ahead, Ash.
So there are two things that I want to highlight. As an immigrant to the U.S., I know that it's not very popular to say this by a lot of Christian intellectuals don't like to hear that, America is a Christian nation, and they reject that. They're like, no, it's not. And sure, on paper, I would agree with that. But the problem is that the rest of the world, the non-Western world, views America as a Christian nation. And it still does, even today, with all of the fragments and so on. And it doesn't understand, like, a Muslim person in Egypt doesn't understand Baptist, CRC, OPC, PCA. They don't care about that stuff. They just care that, well, you know what? All the ethic of what America is very Christian. The problem is they're really bad at it. So that's one point. And the second thing is that, I think Teddy was kind of hinting on this. A lot of what was the responsibility of the church was taken over by government. So, things like hospitals, let's say, mental illness facilities, and so on. I mean, one of the most fascinating characters for me as a founding father for the U.S. is Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush, a Pennsylvanian guy, and he was one of the first guys who modernized, for at least that time, how to treat mental illness. It used to be that you would put them in dungeons and hide them and not deal with them, and he would say, no, have a conversation with them, talk to them, let's see what we can learn from these people. Give them some sunlight and fresh air and proper food, and let's see what happens. Well, that came from a very Christian ethic. And he used money through the churches, and he didn't say that governments should do this. He was doing it through the church. And so, but then over technology and things getting more complicated and making things more homogeneous and streamlined and so on, we said, you know what, let's let our taxpayer dollars do this so that everybody gets the same treatment. Well, you took away a lot of the reasons for church, and this is some of the stuff that you talk about, Paul, about how, what was the point of going to church then? I can just get involved in politics and get my job done a lot quicker.
All right, WV, you got your face on here now. So it was your question. It's a great question. You have any further responses to it?
Well, I wanted to second on what was just said about the church kind of surrendering a lot of its place to to government institutions. A lot of this is so the part of the question is sort of an ongoing thing, and I've commented and passed on some of your videos about how even back in the 80s when I was in school, when I was in college, I read a paper about the rise of the pastoral counseling movement, which was sort of really taking off in the early 80s, and how the church was sort of seeing itself as a therapeutic agent, and through the 90s as the therapeutic state became the idea of all of that sort of gets shifted over to the government. And I can think in one of my problems in trying to re-engage the church. I'm deconstructing my none and done status. But I'm almost needing to do kind of a truth and reconciliation process and try to figure out how much of this whole, and I think that's the best explanation, what's holding me back from re-engaging is intentional. How much of it was simply accepting a government model of community as opposed to a religious model of community?
That's really good. That's a really good question. And that, yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. Cassidy, did you want to jump in?
Well, yeah, I just find the whole idea of sort of how do we frame church and how does our governments and the way that we see the structures that have been laid out in front of us affect the way that we participate in community and religion. That's something I've had to struggle with myself. And I've been through mental health systems. They're not very good. They're not very holistic. And I think they struggle with trying to separate science and religion too much. And I think there's just a whole Western frame of like the rationality is king that has made it hard to integrate big ideas into life and what it means to live meaningful. And that's why I personally found Eastern Orthodoxy to kind of be a more refreshing way to look at life, and has given me a more holistic way of living life. And it's broken sort of those Western categories of how do I integrate faith and what does it mean to come to true answers about those things. And, in the faith, in the faith question, the truth, beauty, and goodness, like what place do those things have in, the pursuit of faith and how we do those things. And I think it's all kind of integrated in those ways. Those are kind of my thoughts. I don't know if exactly that was the way you were going, but that is what I was thinking, hearing all of it.
Okay.
Maybe to add one thing to it, it's like we have a lot of people today, and this also goes to living in apathy that I mentioned this. We live here in the heads and not here in the hearts, and that's the big problem. We hold all those ideas in our head, but we don't live them through. Like we don't act out what we believe. We don't live, and that's also you can like also see here in Europe in general. We just don't live out what we believe. We just play some video games or just do some some random things, but we don't like really engage with the world. And I think a lot of that's like there is nothing also to like drive us to engage into the world, and that's a bit of the problem with no church or no central institution or thing that draws us together and draws us to the sky, basically to heaven, you could say. Like, and that's I think also a problem, like that we don't like really live.
Okay, good, thank you. Any Mike, you jumped in here, did you want to say something? I can't hear you. Discord.
Well, one thing to just bounce off of what Volip's just said, I listened to the Lord of Spirits podcast probably a couple months back, but the first episode talked all about this idea of like what we live out versus what we believe. And, their whole premise was, as Eastern Orthodox Christians, we don't believe in a materialistic world, but how often do we act as if the world is materialistic? We're far more often willing to go to a doctor first before we go to prayer or some other type of thing. And, not in Eastern Orthodoxy is very sort of embodied where the physical and the spiritual are very linked. So it wasn't like doctors are important, but it was something to say, like it says something about what we truly believe about the world. And I think they called most of us a recovering materialist.
Okay.
And I found that true for myself, even though I would never have called myself a materialist ever in my life. I acted as if the material world was all there is far more often than was congruent with what I actually believed.
Okay. Did you get your mic worked out, Mike?
I think I did. Do you guys hear me?
I hear you. Yep.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. So I'm in the same boat as you, Cassie. I would also call myself as a recovering materialist in a way. And I want to go back to the initial question where it was asked that what was the hole left from the church, and all I could keep thinking about was I wanted to invert that and say maybe the church was filling multiple holes for any given individual at once. Right? Somebody mentioned that in one area the church was filling, it was involved in government, involved in social activities, all of these things. And now that the church isn't so involved in people's lives, and especially now that the internet has kind of accelerated the creation of technologies and ideas on how to fill those holes, right? The church is having an especially difficult time trying to fill all those holes it once did for people. There's definitely something to be said for the church as one unifying thing that fills all those holes at the same time for any given person. But materialism has kind of eroded the trust that the church can do that effectively, or at least, people don't believe the base assertions of the church. So therefore they think that the church can't fill those holes without having some sort of contradiction there.
Yeah.
Right. And that the internet really, ways of filling those holes have really exploded, whether people know they're doing it or not.
Yeah.
And people have no way of evaluating which way is better than the other.
Yeah.
Right. Where the church has this unifying, it's like, okay, it fills everything.
Yeah.
Everything. We have a thing for every need spiritual need that you have. Yeah. Whether you know it or not. And
before the internet, the marketplace.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And people have been, pastors have noted, grazing. So I do small groups at this church. I do worship at this church on only the certain weeks that a certain pastor preaches, or when the worship leader is there. But I listen to PVK, and I get some things from a Dutch Calvinist pastor who doesn't quite fit into some boxes. But then I get my mass over at the Orthodox Church, and people are sort of. But you're right that there's not ideally religions have a certain amount of tension and cohesion because the various aspects are knit together, at least with some thought and some intentionality, whereas people are sort of ad hocing it and salad barring it and picking as they go. So no, good point. It's a good point.
Make for a really gross salad if you take all the wrong things, right?
So thank you, W.D. Pilgrim. Great question, and I hope what was here was helpful. We are.
Thank you.
We are nearing the end of our time here, and I'll have to. Boy, I can really see. I already know that Rick is going to be. Well, you got to get through more questions. That you hardly got through any questions, and that's true. And you guys added more questions. I will have to look at some of these questions, but also give me some feedback on this way of dealing with questions. Again, part of what I'm trying to do is experiment. And we have the tradition of the YouTube celebrity answering questions for the audience, and people are, oh, he answered my question, or he answered my question, the answer was horrible, or he talked for 30 minutes on the first question and didn't get to the rest of them and gave the rest short shrift. So we'll keep playing around with this, but some really excellent questions. And obviously it's more fun if you're in the room when I address the question, because, as was the case both with Teddy and WV, that must be West Virginia, maybe, Pilgrim. When I see your face and when you flesh out the question, it really helps me. And when I know, this is just Pastoral Care 101, when I know you more than just I have the question is too thin a thing. And once even just the little fringes of getting added to it helps me, I think, address you. And part of why I want to address you is because there's lots of yous out there, not identical, not the same, but the more particular I can get it, probably the better the answer and the more helpful. So, all right, that's going to do it for today. So thank you, those of you who joined us here on the Bridges of Meaning Discord, and thank you, those of you who are watching on, I look over there because that's where our computer is, for you who are watching online and contributing to the chat. Thank you, Rick and Anselman, for having the wrenches and moderating the chat room. Thank you, the moderators and authorities on the Bridges of Meaning Discord, and thank you, all the Bridgers who are on here doing your thing. And now the live stream ends right now, but on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, the after parties continue. One of the beautiful things about this Discord server is we can create, any number of rooms for conversation. And as I have often encouraged on the server, is when you're having conversations, turn the cameras on, because the degree to which we can, we have more of each other, even in this virtually not alone implementation we have going here, heightens the capacity for more community, for more knowledge, for more wisdom. And, so Cassidy, just by the luck of the draw, was the one who was left in the little window here. So there you go, Cassidy. But, Cassidy's been around the server for a long time. She was on the channel before that. She has her own channel. And when we had the little West Coast tour that was interrupted by COVID, I got a chance to meet Cassidy when I was in Tucson, Arizona. And just the opportunity to meet someone physically just heightens the resolution on my knowledge of that person, and therefore our capacity to actually go back and forth. And I really appreciated WV Pilgrim's fleshing out of his question, because these are sometimes people ask, well, why do I keep mentioning Grim Grizz and his little project, this little channel with 600 subs? Because Grizz is onto something in terms of the internet that we want to not be alone. And deep inside of us, we want shalom, we want healing, we want kingdom come. I mean, we don't want anything less. And, Augustine, our hearts are restless until our hearts find their rest in God. But, that sounds way too God number 2-ish, because in some ways God is, when we have God, we have everything. And again, that sounds so cliche, but this is what we're all working on. So, all right, I can't tell Rick to end transmission. I have to do it myself. And last time I did this, I didn't actually stop the stream, and then Rick was texting me, "You didn't stop the stream. You didn't stop the stream. Don't do anything embarrassing. Oh, I ended the stream, so I'll pick my nose now, and the memesters will memorialize my nose picking." So anyway, thank you all for joining me. Pardon the nose picking reference. And I will end transmission. And I know now that I have to check both of these boxes. And stick around in the Discord server for more conversation after the stream.